Greetings, everyone. This is the hipster Snek, and today I want to do something a little bit different from the norm. Sort of a more positive, don't make games like series. Half review, half analysis. We aren't really going to worry about graphics and sound in these unless there's a glaring issue related to them, and we're going to focus primarily on mechanical and design concerns. The way this will work is the video will be broken up into 3 major sections: what they did right, what they did wrong, and how do we fix it. Guys, I totally get if these games aren't your cup of tea. That's the point of this series. But nobody wins if a game is bad or if it's cancelled. So let's put some actual constructive criticism to good use today. Not that I'm a game dev myself, nor have I majored in the studies behind this thing. So think of my stance as approaching this as a fan who wants to see devs do great things. With that in mind, let's get started. The subject of today's How Do We Fix It? Garten of Banban. So you guys might remember I did a full playthrough of this game, or rather its first chapter, not too long ago. For context, I was also suffering a 102-degree fever and a little bit high on my cold medicine, so I gave it a general overall rating of, yeah, it's pretty okay. But holy cow, I was not expecting the absolute fallout that would ensue. It's to the point now where I'm inundated daily with videos with names like the indie horror problem, or indie horror is over, or how Garten of Banban robbed my mother and kicked my dog. Yeah, I get it, inflammatory titles drive clicks, but I think this is entirely overblown. Seriously guys, just invoke Sturgeon's Law and get over yourselves. Enough clickbaiting. Anyway, I think it's important to remember that this game is made by 2 brothers with what appears to be limited help if the game's brief credits are to be believed. And a quick look at the dev's Steam page shows they made quite a few games before, and some are quite well reviewed. Not that this stops the doomsday callers and people frowning very thoughtfully at their cameras for their thumbnails. That aside, let's get started with what they did right. Garten of Banban Episode 1 is free on Steam. So yeah, that's pretty cool. This is a common tactic, essentially treating your prologue like it's a demo and get some hype generated. And it worked. And maybe it worked a little too well? More on that later. That aside, the game is quick to establish its base premise. You are a concerned parent of a missing child who attended a particular kindergarten that has its own roster of colorful mascot characters. No one's sure why this happened, but it did, and now you seem to be the only responsible party taking any action. You also immediately can see the characters painted on a nearby wall in the game's very first room, so they waste no time establishing the game's premise. A little later, a particular moment that served as a nice setup for what's to come is when you venture down the first hallway, you'll see Chapter 1's primary antagonist, Opila Bird, staring you down before withdrawing into the room it rests within. More on this later. Get used to me saying that, I will be saying it a lot. And, near the end of the chapter, in my cold medicine-induced stupor, looking up from a puzzle to see the bird approaching me via ski lift, I guess, was actually unnerving, and in my dreamlike haze, much more panic-inducing than it was with a clear, sober, healthy head. But it served its purpose to build up tension, so that's good. Universally across the chapter, the goals are all clearly defined. Even the literal Easter egg hunt is limited to a singular room for the sake of convenience. This is a game-ish tactic, but one that works its role quite nicely. Also, Banban's quote being, "Your pancreas is mine," is just cartoonish and overblown, and yeah, that's actually pretty funny. Well done. And I have to say, the animation on Opila Bird during the final sequence is really well done. It bobs and moves around like a living bird once the final chase sequence is cued, and I'm genuinely impressed with the amount of detail. And that's it. That's basically all the things I liked about Chapter 1. So now the reason I'm sure everyone is actually here, let's get into what they did wrong. So let's get into it. Right away, something I missed because, again, I was sick, was that there's a merchandise store linked on the start screen. This rubbed a lot of people wrong, but honestly, I just don't care. They're free to market however they want, so to me, that's whatever, but I think they were really counting chickens prior to their hatching because more problems arise as soon as the chapter starts for related reasons. We see the characters right away, as I just got done saying, which is good for pacing because it sets a certain degree of expectation. What it does wrong, however, is the characters themselves. They're just blobs. What are we even looking at here? They're just shoddily drawn, perfectly monochrome blob creatures. Banban and his female counterpart might be cats, maybe, but they don't have tails or any other features apart from having triangular ears. And the eyes look copy-pasted from one character to the next, These designs are atrocious. The point of mascot horror is to make punchy, interesting, and thematically appropriate characters for the setting. The reason Freddy Fazbear, whether you love him or hate him, is iconic is because he represents something. He's a cartoon bear, and a bear is a concept that you understand. While they did a good job with coloring each character differently, they lack that same theming, so they become entirely forgettable. While writing this script, I completely forgot about the existence of Stinger Flynn and Captain Fiddles. And if you don't remember which one those are, it's the jellyfish and the caveman creature, and that's just a guess. They could literally be anything apart from the orange one and the cyan one. Your mascots need to resonate with the viewer in at least some capacity. There needs to be something recognizable about them. The devs absolutely nailed the idea about each of them being unique, certainly, but seriously, try drawing one of them from memory. I bet you can't do it. That's because they have no defining characteristics to call their own. I barely remember their names. I had to look up the two I just named, and I'm not sure I'll go on remembering them after this video has gone live. This is antithetical to the very heart of mascot horror, because the point is the enemy is supposed to be cute in the daylight and terrifying in the dark. And unfortunately, these MS Paint blobs accomplish neither of those tasks. So the cast is in dire need of a major overhaul. More on this in a bit. But of all the 6 designs, Opila Birds is, at present, likely the best one because it represents something. It's a bird. And it serves as primary antagonist for Chapter 1. Again, more on that in a moment. Oh, wait, you already made merch for these characters. Well, let this be a lesson for presumptuous game devs out there. The first mechanic we find are some round peg, round hole puzzles using keycards and finding stray batteries to activate a drone. Bizarrely enough, the batteries don't seem to spawn in until you have the drone in hand. I don't care for puzzles like this, as batteries are one of the most obvious possible choices for adventure or puzzle game moments, and withholding them discourages open and nonlinear exploration. Kindly don't do that. But the real heart of the matter here is the fact that we then get the drone mechanic and there's no other word for it. It's terrible. There's literally no point, since all it does is push buttons and confuse the subject matter of your logical progression. There's nothing that this thing does that a human protagonist cannot do on their own, so it's just a go-between. The drone also muddies water when we're told about yellow glass, a completely superfluous mechanic where the drone can slightly bump into it, causing it to shatter in overblown fashion, but only randomly after pushing a particular button to tinge it yellow, and this is bad and useless. These don't actively add anything to the experience that isn't facilitated by virtue of having an avatar that we can pilot around the environment. Give us a hammer to break the glass and let's just push buttons with our hands. This drone is worthless. And speaking of that drone, in the same room we acquire it in, we get our first note, a drawing by a boy in the class, speaking of how he will slay the monster, that pink bird thing I've referenced a few times now. Broadly speaking, kids don't refer to things they like as the monster. They would usually use a name or a descriptor. This indicates that the monster is a threat, which leads us back to my speaking of the peeking bird from down the hallway and the what they did right section. I like that moment, but it is marred due to this moment. The note is to warn the player that the pink bird is our enemy. It is a monster. But then to have it menacingly stare us down from a distance as we approach accomplishes the same storytelling beat once again. The bird has now been established as villain directly and indirectly, so the impact is reduced because we already suspect it, due to the note next to the item we literally cannot progress without. It's a minor gripe, I admit, but in horror, exposure time to threat matters a great deal, and more on this later, of course. Anyway, we're then free to explore, though most of the rooms are quite useless. Most of the stuff that you will find is confusing and ultimately either unhelpful or counterintuitive. Exploring the classroom gets you a note that seems to indicate someone is trying to distract us somehow. Any ideas what this one's supposed to even mean? Anyway, we get the hammer, allowing us to explore further, which brings us to the ball pit room, and this is just insanity. The instant I saw this gigantic hole in the floor area, it really took me out of the story. What kindergarten has a ball pit, let alone a colossal one the size of a building that descends several floors down and can only be traversed using a clunky, inefficient keycard and ski lift system? This is Black Mesa levels of OSHA oversight. But we cross the pit, and then solve a basic color matching puzzle, and then the last leg of the chapter begins with the Opila bird done pretending it has any measure of subtlety, and it somehow activates the keycard activated lift with the keycard it no longer has. Now that I think on this sequence of events doesn't actually make any sense, does it? Anyway, we're forced to wait a while as the sequence slowly plays out, and the bird begins slowly making its way over to have a go at us, and then the random, inconveniently placed giant button finally becomes interactable, giving our drone one last thing to do this chapter, and remind us that this system doesn't really add anything to the gameplay experience. And then the 10-second chase sequence ensues, and remember how I said exposure in horror matters? This is precisely what I'm talking about. This threat rises and then resolves so rapidly, it might as well have not been in the game in the first place, because we dart across a path that has 3 turns built into it and slap the emergency stop button that we plainly see upon entering the zone in the first place. This yanks the structurally questionable platform back into the wall to drop the bird into the equally questionable abyss, ending the first, last, and only threat to our progress in all of Chapter 1. I'm sorry, but this is super lame and it gives the player no ability to appreciate this scene. And chase scenes can be troublesome. If they go on for too long, the horror is overtaken by the player adjusting to the shock factor, and it will quickly become tedious and unfun, which you definitely don't want to have happen. However, this chase is the opposite. It's so short that it becomes pointless, or that it was included so the first chapter could have a spooky moment built into it, because that's how mascot horror is supposed to be. Upon leaving with our multicolored keycards, we can go back to the cafeteria and get a tape that literally tells us nothing we didn't already know. It's just kids playing, followed by a loud sound, and then children screaming. This indicates that the children that are presently missing and presumably dead or worse went missing and are presumably dead or worse. This adds nothing, and you don't lose anything in your experience for not bothering to find it. I also learned later on, after I recorded my playthrough, that if you found a hidden egg in the ball pit room and feed it to the bird before finishing the puzzle in there, you can get a purple keycard opening one last room in Chapter 1. However, all that's in there is a near-identical boarding pass as one that you find later on. For all the trouble this can be, this is not a worthy prize and just another waste of the player's time, near as I can tell. Then the chapter ends with, what else, an elevator sequence that gets derailed due to the hostile green giant, and we plummet into the inky black abyss, bringing Chapter 1 to a predictable end. Because, as I always say, elevators in games are basically designed with failure and falling in mind. There's so many things in this chapter that make me just go, yes, but why would a kindergarten have this in the first place? The cafeteria is just 3 benches with basic backless stools, but they have eternally deep ball pits, sophisticated keycard systems, and gigantic industrial elevators? There's a difference in tipping the player that something is wrong here, and then just ripping them out of the story through poor environmental exploration. So, let's finally get into how they can fix it. Is Garten of Banban beyond repair? No. And anyone who says otherwise is being either deliberately disingenuous or they're clickbaiting again. The basic story through line is enough to carry a mascot horror game, and since the game code doesn't set my computer on fire, it's definitely not beyond all hope. Which is more than I can say for some other projects I've seen in my life. At any rate, let's start from the beginning. The mascot designs need a serious overhaul. Even if you use simple animal motifs and some kind of title, you'd have something going for them. Banban the cat might get you better traction than just this red necklace blob thing with party hats, for example. And that's another thing. Give these characters some body definition. The complete absence of a neck on all of them but the bird is obvious and jarring. The mascots are being made for kids, not by them. Banban and his distaff counterpart can be improved with some simple additions of tails and maybe some whiskers. Bam! Banban is now something that is identifiable. Sure, a cat isn't very original in terms of animals used, but at least it's something. Jumbo Josh, who the devs seem to like a great deal, can still be a giant. Josh the Giant still has a pleasant alliterative appeal that would give him some kind of family to reside within. Just give the poor guy some fingers or something. Stinger Flynn is a terrible idea. First of all, kids should not be told jellyfish are in any ways friendly, and also they have a tendency to just kind of collapse into an angry puddle whenever they're on land. I legitimately do not know how you plan on making this thing any kind of enemy encounter in the game. However, devil's advocate time, that could be entirely the point. This kindergarten is not to be trusted under any circumstances. Then you might have the option to include it as a stationary boss encounter where the player can take action around it as it attacks from a mounted position using its tendrils. That's an idea. Captain Fiddles can easily be fixed, but why a captain? Isn't he a caveman? Make him a bit taller, give him a club, bam, problem solved. Meet Fiddles the caveman. Next. Of all of them, Opila Bird is fine. Leave it be design-wise. Now, in terms of relationship with the player, perhaps making it a bit less on the nose is the way to go. Remove or change that first note in the game referencing it. Perhaps mention the kid swears he saw the bird move when no one else had, and maybe got in trouble for raising a fuss about it. This leaves room for ambiguity in terms of motivations, and adds to the air of mystery when it decides to stare you down for that moment. This is a subtle way to raise the stakes without telling the player point blank who their enemy actually is. And now, that little drone problem. On the one hand, I want to throw the whole thing in the trash and be done with it, but it does seem like ideas for it are coming. Weirdly enough, more on this later. However, if you're going to insist on the drone, then it needs to be less video gamey and be a tool at the player's disposal. Have it actually follow the player room to room, perhaps in close proximity just outside the player's viewpoint. This might be tricky to execute, but it'll make all the difference in the world when it comes to immersion, and it would no longer require a teleport here button to be even remotely functional. Right now, it simply serves as that thing you're obligated to use to push buttons that nothing is stopping you from pressing. On its own, this is functionally worthless. However, consider the following. Some buttons within the player's reach which the player can press, coupled with some that are clearly out of reach that only the drone can assist with. Suddenly, you now have a useful alternative for puzzles solved at range, and a new way to configure the ball pit of death. And let's get into that, since it's the only other major moment of gameplay apart from the very okay Easter egg hunt. In short, as it stands, you cross over, perform a puzzle, and a chase sequence happens which basically resolves in all about 15 seconds. Here's a much better idea. There's an entire room full of random stuff just outside the ball pit. How about, instead, the chase drives the player from the ball pit room through the play area, back down the hall to the first area, and into the cafeteria instead. Set up some kind of trap or usable factor in the environment that doesn't need that useless time sink of a drone to execute, and raise the tensions a little bit. The doors to later in the chapter are already closed at this point anyway, and you can close unimportant areas off temporarily during the sequence so the player can't get confused. This will make what is, right now, a completely superfluous zone into something of significance, and if you insist on the tape player being there despite telling the player nothing, this is a good way to steer them to it without being required to meaninglessly backtrack into it in order to stumble upon it. In fact, make the tape tell us something we didn't already know. Even if it isn't immediately useful, it could be a recitation or something, or a teacher giving an overview of a lesson plan or a schedule. It can be anything, just not the empty, useless white noise that it is now. Heck, make it the guy who drew the mascots in the first place and explain his rationale for one of their designs or something. In fact, here's the thing. I'll put my money where my mouth is. If you ask me to, I will write and record something for it for the benefit of your deepest lore. I'm not even joking. I'll do it for free. Just literally anything else than a random sequence of noises. All this being done, the first chapter would have a more satisfying through line, a longer and more interesting chase sequence, and far less of the map going utterly to waste. However, as it turns out, we're not actually done yet, and good lord, this script is like 5 solid pages of text, but in the time it took me to put this together, the devs dropped the trailer for Chapter 2, and actually by the time this video goes live, Chapter 2 will already be out. But honor dictates that I look into it in order to get a handle on the direction this is all going. So, special segment for this inaugural episode is Looking to the Future, Chapter 2 trailer. Alright, not going to sugarcoat anything here. Remember, I haven't played this yet. I've only seen the trailer, and honestly, it looks pretty cool. Now, mind you, trailers usually lie and often spoil, but it looks like a lot's going on here, way more than Chapter 1. In no particular order, drone customization. I don't know if this is just for looks or not, but it's possible we get add-ons or attachments, or please at least let me duct tape a knife onto it and make it a bayonet or something. Worst case scenario, I can make it yellow and give it a cowboy hat, which would at least amuse me. So, that's a promising move in the right direction. The environment seems much bigger, giving some implications that something much grander and far more terrifying than a kindergarten was at work here, with construction zones and this creepy face thing that genuinely threw me off when I first saw it. We also meet some new mascot characters, including what appears to be a black frog, a yellow snail, and a royal blue abomination with 3 eyes and lamprey teeth. We also see multiple mascots, both active, like Banbalina and Jumbo Josh, actively seeking out to attack the player, and some inactive ones, like multiple colorful copies of Captain Fiddle strewn about, and even a garden full of baby Opila birds. There's a parkour sequence now, too. Overall, this trailer is solid, not gonna lie. I'm genuinely interested where they're gonna go with this concept now. I was actually going to just release this video and wash my no hands of this game, but this legit roped me back in. I think I will follow along and see how this develops. And since the game is being released episodically, there's really no reason they can't update older chapters as they go along. And I hope that they do. I want to stress that this is a good faith critique with ways the devs can improve something that already has a promising start. In all sincerity, I'm rooting for the Euphoric Brothers, and I plan to investigate some of their older games as well. I sincerely hope nothing I'd said comes off as an attack. There's been enough of that from what I can see, and I certainly hope it doesn't come off as clickbaitish. That's how they can easily fix Garten of Banban. This has been the Hipster Snek, and I hope you guys enjoyed this first How to Fix, and hopefully with others to follow after. Join me here each week for more reviews, Let's Play, Snek Techs, and much more to come. Whatever it happens to be, I will see you there.